Hello and welcome to James Bond with Coffee. This is the With Coffee podcast series by the Coffee family. And for this first season, we are looking at James Bond. We are going to watch every James Bond film and give you some commentary afterwards. The point is we're going to give you multi-generational views, fun facts, and hot takes. I'm the old guy. My name is Joe Coffee, and I'm live switching this. So if you're watching the YouTube version, my apologies if I forget to switch cameras here and there. All right, who else is here?
Emiko Coffee. I am 21 years old.
And I'm Miyako Coffee, and I'm 16.
So some backstory stuff. Number one, we are doing the quarantine thing for the coronavirus COVID-19 situation.
Day 8.
Yep, day 8.
Day 8. So this is our project. We love James Bond. We've watched the films over and over, and we thought, you know what? Let's start at Dr. No and work our way up and do a little research, but just watch and give different perspectives on what we're seeing. Some of it involves how well these films hold up. Some of it involves saying, oh my gosh, here's a cool little thing I didn't notice the first 30 times I watched this. So let's get started with conventions. People love James Bond films for many reasons, and one of the fun things to do is to wait for those things that happen in every episode. And one of them happens pretty quickly, usually somewhere near the top, and that's the gun barrel thing where James Bond walks through and shoots the gun.
So, a little fun fact about this is my favorite fun fact, is that in all of Sean Connery's films, when he's playing James Bond, you would assume, oh, the person in the barrel of the gun is Sean Connery. It's actually not. His name is Bob Simmons. And I don't know. I think that's really interesting that was a last minute thing that they were like, oh, let's grab this stunt guy, Bob Simmons, instead of Sean Connery.
And it became a huge thing.
It became a huge thing. It's so iconic to James Bond. But as people who we love James Bond, right? We haven't seen this movie in so long, but right away you're like, wait a second. That's I don't know Sean Connery's measurements, but that's not Sean Connery.
So that's a little different. There's usually a big animation sequence with a huge theme song. Not the case in this one.
Nope.
No, it's
Mango
practically
Tree.
nothing. It's just, I don't even know. They just have the credits at the beginning of the movie and just a black scene with some silhouettes dancing, but there's no theme song like I was expecting because I haven't watched Dr. No in so long. I forgot there was no theme song. It's just this one Mango Tree song that keeps playing throughout the entire movie.
Fun fact, if you haven't seen it in a while, James Bond sings the Mango song.
Yeah, he does. He almost kills his lady, but he decides to sing.
He sure does. As Ursula Andress comes out of the water in her iconic bikini with the knife holster in it, and she's looking for seashells. She's singing a song, and he comes out. He starts singing the song to her, and it's quite a moment in Dr. No. Yeah. Other conventions, there is usually a lot of spycraft. This one's a little different. The Q, Desmond, I forget the actor's name, he's in a million James Bond films. He's not in this one, but the quartermaster makes a brief appearance in the office with M, and M takes away James Bond's American gun.
His Beretta.
Yeah, to give him the famous Walther PPK, and so the quartermaster's just barely there, not much of a part.
The only really thing he says is he gives a diss to James Bond that Beretta can fit in a female's purse.
Oh,
that's all he's got. It's just
Ouch.
a diss, but that's enough. That's enough to leave a mark for the cues to come.
There's some interesting things to observe technology-wise. The first couple times you see a desk, you may not notice, but look closely. There's no computer on it. There's a separate desk with a typewriter. And you kind of get a feel for how offices worked back then. That's one thing to look
It's
at.
1962. They didn't have computers. I think. I have no idea.
Yeah.
You might know.
Yeah. No, they didn't. There is a ham radio. That's how they communicate. it's this big console thing with a microphone, and they're like, "Come in, London, XQ42." Da, 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 da. You know, it's interesting because as a kid in the '70s, and it's still around today, but not too many people do it. But when I was a kid, you would hear about people who had a hobby of ham radio, and you could like, tune in Tokyo, whatever, with these dials, and if the conditions are right, the ionosphere is lower at night and signals bounce further or whatever. And so you could like communicate with people in Australia or whatever, and that was a hobby. And so it was also a legit form of communication between governments and, in this case, spies and home base. And so there's this scene where a lady operating the ham radio gets taken out, and it's like, wow, ham radio, that's right, that was kind of how they had to do it back then.
And they had no idea she was taken out. That's what blows my mind, is they had to wait like days until James Bond showed up, and he was like, oh yeah, you're right, she's not here. Which is crazy.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, looking at all of this stuff, I have no idea what that stuff is. It looks so gimmicky to me. It looks fake. I have no. They're just pressing buttons on this screen, and then the dial turns up and down, and you're like, ooh, I guess they're talking to each other. But I don't know. I mean, I see a typewriter, I know what that is, and you see an old phone. I have no idea what any of this stuff is. It just makes the old films look so gimmicky. It really does. I don't know.
Like a lot of these films, when you get to the evil person's lair at the end, they should have cutting edge technology, right? And the evil things they're going to do with laser beams or whatever. In this case, Dr. No's lair, it's not like some cool, huge, massive thing under a volcano with a sliding lake so helicopters can land. That comes later. This is just on a little remote island called Crab Key. Mm-hmm. And before we get to the lair, let me back up. Let's talk about the dragon on Crab Key.
The dragon is like a tank is the only thing I think I could compare it to, but it's got like these painted teeth and these eyes, and it spits fire, and it moves the pace of a snail, but everyone's scared of it.
Yeah, there's this legend in Jamaica, like that's to this part that's close to Crab Key, and they're like, oh, there's a dragon on there, don't go on that island. And so then once you see the dragon, it's just this tank that moves 5 miles an hour and shoots fire out of this little tiny hole, and it's supposed to be really scary apparently, but yeah, that's the dragon, the really scary legend.
It didn't hold up too well. There are things that don't hold up too well. Some of it is kind of cute because it doesn't hold up that well.
Like the dragon.
Like the dragon, and even, we love Bond films because of the spycraft and the gadgets. Mm-hmm. And, there aren't a whole lot of gadgets, but there's a hotel scene where he's doing spycrafty things to make sure he can find out if someone came in the room later, right?
The licking the thumbs and making sure the hair is on the crack of the door and putting the baby powder, like that's so clever. That's stuff that I should use with my like college roommates. Like, don't steal my sweater, girlfriend. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's stuff that's so simple that I'm like, James Bond really does that, It's not really high-tech stuff in these first movies.
Yeah. There are some gun silencers. There's no fancy car shooting rockets. A lot of that stuff is yet to come.
It's pretty cute to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all that stuff, in my eyes, is just proof to how, like, cunning and clever James Bond is to use, like, the hair off his head and his saliva to know that someone has been there, instead of just be like, well, I guess we'll find out when I get dead,
Yeah, and the cunning and the clever is such a big part of Ian Fleming's novels. When you read them, it's a book, and so you're getting the narrative from the author and this narrator, and so there's a lot of description, and so and it's very British. I call them recitations. If you look closely in every James Bond film, there's a chance, there are usually a couple of opportunities where somebody British will just recite like all the specs of this gun or everything you should know about this trade or whatever. And it's usually James Bond being challenged, and somebody says, oh, I bet you don't know about this. And Bond will say, actually, this is a 1957 Sauvignon Blanc, blah, 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 blah. And there are these moments, and you can see how that comes from the books. And even in these early films, like the Walther PPK thing, he loses his Beretta and he gets the British gun and he recites, the specs about it. I find that very interesting because later on, there's a conscious decision to keep those. You see Daniel Craig and Pierce Brosnan, everybody has their little moment where they get to recite how smart they are about it. And it kind of builds into, this is a smart character. He's a spy. He's not just a brute with a gun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I like knowing that it was a conscious nod from the director to the author. I like knowing that they added that to really this is from a book that somebody wrote. I really think that's cool.
And they don't water everything down like
No.
the Baccarat scene. I don't know how to play that game. They showed him drawing 2 queens and the guy with the paddle moves a thing. And I have no idea what's going on, but you just sit there and watch. You're like, cool, I think he's winning.
Yeah, those little scenes where he gets to recite stuff like that. I mean, James Bond is such a sly dude who gets all the ladies, but he's smart. There's a reason he's a double O agent. So it makes sense.
So there is this thing with Moneypenny. In the very first film here, Dr. No, there's an unrequited love of a play flirty thing that they do with each other that I guess I haven't seen Dr. No in a while.
Ew.
But yeah, he sits on her lap. Well, first of all, he tosses the hat. This is a convention that happens in many films. They lose it at some point. They play with it a few times and the hat misses or whatever. But yeah, so there's the hat thing. But then he walks right in and he sits on Moneypenny's lap and he's fawning all over her as they have their witty banter. I found it kind of weird.
I thought it was I thought it was kind of clever for Moneypenny to nudge back, because typically it's just James Bond being the James Bond and the ladies are going all over him. But Moneypenny says, why don't you dress for me, and why don't you dress like that for me and take me out to dinner? I kind of like that she is giving him a little
Right on.
I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I get uncomfortable watching the Moneypenny James Bond scenes when they're flirting like that. Because I don't know, Moneypenny, you can do so much better. What are you? I don't know. I mean, James Bond is going out with every other girl. Why are you trying to flirt with him? And it's it makes the time go by in the office, maybe, but stop.
It's just an office romance.
Moneypenny's awesome. She can go for so much better.
So we have to talk about the cringy thing that is part of the times. If you watch Turner Classic Movies, you know that every old movie in black and white has at least 2.5 forced kisses in it, where the man smashes his face into the lady's face, and at some point she'll acquiesce and kiss back, and it's this ridiculous thing. And you see that in these James Bond films. And so here we are celebrating James Bond in our podcast series, but at the same time, there's some cringy stuff.
Yeah, that's part of it, where I'm torn watching those scenes where he's just force kissing the woman, and then she ends up giving in
so
halfway
wrong.
through, because at first I'm just it's James, it's what he does, it's all that, it's the time, and then part of me I'm like, okay, well, that's ew, I don't want to watch that. That's just kind of gross, and it just blah.
I hate it. I am a part of a generation that is squashing gender norms and squashing everything that has been so wrong. And I see that and I'm like, no, that's not okay. We do not condone that. That is not okay. He should not be doing that. She should stand up and smack him. But I also love James Bond so much. So I'm with you. I'm torn.
Yeah, so
but I
you
want to
don't-
vocalize that it is not okay. And James Bond, you should never get away with that. Not with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a cringy part of the old films, and even in some of the newer ones, But we do like James Bond. You're saying it's not okay, and we'll probably have this conversation a lot as this podcast goes on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another thing that's not okay, I can look at and laugh and get over it, but Dr. No, it's even in the dialogue, he explains how he's an orphan. His mother is Chinese. So he's a half-C like me.
Yep.
I'm half Japanese. You
Yep,
guys are quarter.
We're quarter.
And there's something about representation in the year 2020 that happens in Hollywood and on Broadway, and you don't put on yellowface. You don't have a white person put on the slanty eye makeup, whatever, and you just don't do that. You get an Asian person, and Asian people can be bad guys. Like, why have... There's even a James Bond film where James Bond tries to pass as Asian.
Right,
so... that is what it is in the old films, but, even Scarlett Johansson recently did a movie where they cast her instead of an Asian American for an Asian American, like, traditional role of a famous character in some culture's folklore. And, I love her. I didn't watch that film because I'm like, really? It's 2020. If you
Right.
watch Broadway, you can see African Americans playing white founding fathers. And there's this weird thing. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable because they're like, well, why can't, if black people can be George Washington, why can't white people wear blackface? And my response to that is, why do you want to wear blackface? It's not a goose gander thing. The rules are different. Keep up. You can do this. Pay attention. Keep up. Black people can play white people on Broadway. Mm-hmm. And it's not okay for white people to put on yellowface. And that's just one of those things. We don't want to get too political on this podcast, but there's my take on that.
I was laughing half the time when I saw, because so before they introduce Dr. No, they have this double agent, this chick who is on Dr. No's side. And right away for me, I could tell, she's either Asian or she's supposed to be Asian of some sort. And a few minutes after, I'm like, okay, she's definitely not Asian. But I mean, they put the winged eyeliner on her, and they put this sort of traditional looking dress on her, and they're like, oh, that's good. She's Asian. She's Chinese now. But it's so bad. You can just tell. You can tell she's white. She's white. Just because you put eyeliner on her doesn't mean she's Chinese or Asian. I was laughing at it. And then once they showed Dr. No, I was kind of looking at him sideways. I was like, he's white. Yeah.
Right. It's so frustrating because of my instinct is just to say, why didn't they just hire an actual Chinese person? That makes sense to me. But that was different times, and that blows my mind that they were in a production studio boardroom and someone threw out that idea and everyone was like, okay, yeah, that's just so mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. And, in one of the Bonds coming up, one of the actors who plays M has a role in a later film where he's a bad guy and he puts on yellowface, and it's like, really, we saw him as M like 3 films ago, like,
right. We know this,
and it's poorly done. But so anyway, that's one of those things that happens when you watch these old films that you kind of have to deal with. And but here's something interesting. I think the conversation we just had, I think a lot of people will hear that and be like, yeah, that's kind of where we're at, and that's how we look at those things, and we move on. But maybe this conversation didn't take place 10 years ago with some people, or even 5 years ago, right? And so there's another one that's just now coming out, and that is the disabled community and representations of disabled people. Like, when you stop and think about it, there are a lot of Bond villains who are disabled, who have claw hands or something to where they're other.
The eye patch.
Yeah, there's something in that makes them maybe not completely 100% capable.
They aren't able-bodied people.
Yeah, and so I think we're at a point now to where the film watching community is starting to become aware and maybe starting to count. And if they keep making every Bond villain have some disability, at some point it's like, really?
Come on, man.
Come on.
It's a cringe moment. It's a cringe moment.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah.
before you pointed out, I mean, I had never thought about it like that, but then once you pointed it out, I was like, shoot.
Well,
albinos. I mean, seriously, there's always some othering thing.
Right. Well, I mean, just as we were talking about, we noticed the misrepresentation of the race, a white person playing a Chinese person, because we are Asian. That's something maybe we would notice earlier. But there are disabled people who would notice that and just, hey, why are my people always villains? And that's
Right.
uncool because
Yeah.
they're not villains.
And I mean, in the end of the movie, Dr. No, he's drowning in the atomic waste pool.
And he can't get a grip.
He can't grip onto the railing because of his hands.
His
and you're like,
disability ends up becoming his shortcomings and is
Technically,
the
yeah.
reason he dies. He might have been able to save himself if he could have gripped with his fingers.
and like, hopefully that's a coincidence. That's just kind of how I have to look at it.
Yeah, well, I think we're all getting a little better and smarter as audience goers, and I trust the filmmakers will too. Eon Productions and the Broccoli family and whatnot. So other things that didn't age well, I think it's interesting to watch these old films and to see the flat lighting. Like everything, indoor, outdoor, in a bar, whatever, everything is lit so bright and it's just so flat. It's kind of annoying. Is that just me?
I found it distracting as somebody in the creative field of photography and being an artist. That's something I'm trained to do, is to notice lighting and pay attention and make it as realistic as possible. And this scene of James Bond, he's getting chased by the hearse down this windy road, and every turn he takes, the sun is right in his face every time. And that's when I'm thinking, dang, is the sun really following him? What's going on here? And given in 1962, I have no idea what they were working with and what they weren't working with. So way better than anything I could have done. But yeah, I mean, I noticed it. I don't know about you, Miyako. Did you notice it?
No, I noticed the lighting and technological stuff when there was this car chase and Emiko asked, she was like, is that a green screen back there with the other car? And my dad, like, no, they didn't have green screens back then. And so, and it becomes very obvious how old the movie was as you're watching this car chase and you're like, oh my God, the car's, it's right on top of him.
Yeah. The projected road behind them that's not moving right, and or what about like the sped up motion in the fist fight scenes and some of the car scenes? You could totally tell they sped up the film to make them punch faster.
Yeah, it almost looks like a silent film or something where you're just watching them wrestle and tussle with each other.
The day for night shooting, that's a thing they did back then. I don't know enough about Panaflex, Panavision, and cameras and conversion, but I do know a day for night scene when I see one. It's like, it's supposed to be nighttime, but man, the shadows are really bright. You're like, wait a second, I think they just did that in post.
I didn't even notice it. I noticed, like, this looks kind of off, but my assumption was it's because it was filmed in 1962 kind of off. And then when Dad said that, I was like, oh, now that you say that, you can't really see the clouds like that at the nighttime and those shadows and all. I was like, oh, well, okay, now I notice that now.
Yeah. And okay, let's talk about the women in this film. It's a thing. The Bond women, sometimes they're bad women, sometimes they're good. Ursula Andress kind of, am I saying that? It's not Andrews, right? It's Andress. She became famous. Yeah. Fun fact, she did not voice her own voice. She was overdubbed because apparently she has a big, was it a German accent?
Yeah.
But yeah. Why wouldn't you just get another actress? That seems like so much work. She has a good amount of lines.
To dub every single thing she says?
It was a good job. If you didn't say that
I
to
had
me,
no
I wouldn't
idea.
have noticed.
I had no idea.
Her character is kind of strong at first, right? She's like, hey, I'm collecting these seashells and I'm my own person. I'm going to sneak out to this island and do it the way. And she kind of challenges James Bond. But then by the end, she's just like, oh, James, save me, kind of tag along, which was.
That's such a James Bond female. That's such a female of James Bond.
Early on, at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, true that. They get. As of late, it's neat to see some conventions broken down with some of these strong female leads.
Yeah.
Who always end up in the sack with them after all, which is kind of like, really? But it is James Bond, right?
Something I do have to notice is this actress that you know by name. When this came out in 1962, I can imagine people watching it being like, oh, I know her, and being able to like point her out. But being a 21-year-old person and 2020, I just knew she was the James Bond female. So it's crazy to me that she was so iconic that they they had to dub her, and that they had to, on all the other characters in this film, because I don't know them by name.
We know James Bond women, like especially in just the later movies. They're like, oh, she is so famous, or they're just really well known, and I have no idea who this chick is.
Yeah.
Really showing your age there, Dad.
Well, I was born in 71, and I watched a lot of TV. We had like 8 channels in Dallas-Fort Worth my entire childhood. There was 4, 5, 8, 11, 13, 21, 27, 33, and 39.
Wow.
Yeah, that was VHF and UHF. So a lot of things ended up, they were made for the big screen, but they were shown as the Sunday night movie, and they had commercials, and they'd cut them for time and content, but you'd see old films before your time, right? So I was familiar with, I guess, her and some of these old James Bond films, and I think that's what's fun. You watch an old Bond film, or any film, but especially these old James Bond films, I always see things that I didn't see before, or I'm just reminded of something. I'm like, oh, wow, they couldn't do that today. Or, oh, wow, that was actually pretty good acting, or like the spider scene in Dr. No. The spider's crawling on him, and you could see him moving, and the spider's not moving with him. So obviously the spider was on glass. But the climax of that little moment is he jumps out of bed. That's it. Like, okay, he survived. The spider didn't bite him. That's like, drama. That's great acting. That's woo.
That's how I would have killed off a spider. Not James Bond, but I'll give it to him. Whatever.
It's really showing James Bond's humanity. He's really just a person like you and I. He doesn't like spiders. Me neither. I do the same thing.
There's another reference to attempted homicide via arachnid in this film. I thought that was funny. There are 2 references to spider deaths.
She actually was able to kill. It was actual homicide, or whatever that would be. She killed her captor with a female
Black Widow.
Black Widow. Put it in his, what's that called? Mosquito net.
That's right. That's right. Let's talk about the ending. Is it just me? Did you feel like it was kind of like rushed, like they were working on this low budget film? They kind of pulled off most of it. Then toward the end, they're like, and this happens in a few different Bond films, like he's in a boat with the Bond girl and he's being rescued, and he does something to delay the rescue so he could spend more time in the boat with the girl. Cue the credits,
Classic. Classic. James Bond, it's his victory thing that he does. I don't know.
I just saved the world. Let me just go spend some time with the woman who helped me save it. And it's James Bond. It's classic James Bond. That was one of the less risque moments, honestly.
Yeah. So overall impressions as we close the podcast here, final thoughts, and maybe even a rating. Who wants to go first?
Well, I don't know. Dr. No is a great way to start off the franchise. They started off a lot of the classic moments and lines and things. Personally, not really close to one of my favorites. It's just kind of hard to follow. This was like my 3rd or 4th time watching it, and this was the first time I actually understood the plot and like there's some of their dialogue. Maybe that's just because I'm 16 and I don't know half of what they're talking about. But yeah, so not one of my favorites, but it's pretty good. I'd rate it a 6.
Okay.
Okay.
Emiko?
I would give it an 8. And I would give it an 8 because it is the first Bond film. It's the one that it's got the hook. It sets the tone for the rest of the franchise. And that's why I love it.
Okay.
So solid 8 for me.
Okay. I think I'm along those lines as well. I would give it a 9 for nostalgia. They do get better. There are 1 or 2 I do give a 10, but I got to go 9 because they got so much right off the bat with a low budget. And they had yet to figure out some of the stronger things that become recurring parts of the film. But it's fun to watch. It's young Sean Connery.
Can never go wrong with young Sean Connery.
At his best, yeah. Apparently, fun fact, he wears a hairpiece in all of the films, Dr. No included, even though he wasn't that old in Dr. No. I guess he's like me. He didn't have the strongest hairline, and so he got a little assistance from...
It's impressive, not very obvious.
I had no idea.
Yeah. if you believe what you read. Anyway, that's what I read. But yeah, strong film. I give it a 9. Everyone listening, thank you so much for checking us out. We're going to have fun with this podcast. We're going to do every film. We are locked up for the coronavirus thing, so we might get through this faster than you might. If you're watching,
a lot of time.
yeah. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for your patience with my late camera switching. I think I got most of these. And you have been listening to James Bond with Coffee. I'm Joe Coffee.
Emiko.
I'm Miyako.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. And we will leave you with this awesome sound-alike James Bond theme music that I composed myself. Oh, yeah.